cabbage. Today I'd like to talk to you about fermentation. So right off the bat, sauerkraut would be a great way to start, right? I mean, you can get cabbage for nothing. If you're growing cabbage, it is an amazingly easy thing to grow, and you can make a lot of it in a short time. And the nice thing about sauerkraut is, once you've made it, if you can store it in a cool place, like say a refrigerator, but it doesn't even have to be in a refrigerator. Down here in the South, it makes sense to do it in a refrigerator if you can pull that off, because it's very hot and it's very humid. But if you can keep this in a cool place, I've had sauerkraut, it lasted 2 years before I finished it, so it could probably go longer. They'll tell you 6 months, but honestly, you stop eating it when it stops having the twang, that tangy, fermented taste to it. I imagine that's when things have basically balanced out and it's on its way to, I don't know, I've never seen it rot, but it's on its way to not being good anymore. But as long as it's got that sauerkraut flavor to it, I can't imagine it's not good for you. But I'm going to go through the test, or the trick, the recipe on how to get this to work. I see it's got the stem. This is where you cut it off the plant. First thing I do is I chop that off. Even though you can ferment that, it's not very tasty. Of course, if you're doing things like kimchi, they're going to be much bigger, thicker chunks, and maybe something like that would work in a kimchi, but it's also going to be the more bitter part, so it's not my favorite. When I juiced, I used to do the Raw Juice Company, and when I was making green drinks, for a while there I was testing on every green leaf I could. Cauliflower, brassica leaves in general are bitter. Now, if you've grown them through the winter and there's been a freeze, they actually get very sweet. They'll turn black and they'll come back. Obviously that's going to be in the South, not a freeze where they're destroyed and dead, but a freeze like 29, 28, 25 degrees, that kind of thing. And it's not sustained all night. It's for like a few hours in the middle of the night, comes back, and they're amazing. So anyway, I get rid of the more bitter part, and I save one of the leaves. Now the reason I save one of the leaves is, and I'll show you later, is to hold the sauerkraut down below the water level in the jar so the oxygen isn't touching any of the kraut, which is where you can develop a mold, and you don't want to develop a mold or whatever. So I'm going to save one of these leaves right off the bat. Now, if I've got some really ugly spots on this leaf, I might pull that off, but I don't. That looks good. This is an organic cabbage. I don't know that, I've only ever done the organic ones or homegrown. I don't know that it's a problem with conventional, but some things that we do, if you use conventional, it's been irradiated or it's got some issues and things don't necessarily work out as great, but that would be for somebody else to say. So I cut it in half. And what's interesting is if you look in there, there's like a tree. You see the stump or the trunk and then all the branches? It's really beautiful, isn't it? Well, I cut the trunk out. I basically come at it at an angle this way, and then I come at it from the other angle like that, and then I pop that trunk out. Partly because it's just big, chunky, and bitter. Now, there's probably plenty of people who say, oh no, I eat it, it tastes like a broccoli stem. I think broccoli stems taste amazing, and these taste okay. But in a sauerkraut, I really don't want there to be, huge, chunky things, in there. I like it to be texture-wise, because texture is a big deal. I want it to be texture-wise pretty homogeneous, I like that feeling. Kimchi, a lot of people like kimchi. It's definitely not a homogeneous texture. It's all over the place, big and chunky and so small and peppery and all that. Love kimchi. I love kimchi, but at the same time, I'm doing sauerkraut today. Now sometimes I'll put when I'm making sauerkraut, I like to do just the generic stuff and add things later. But I have actually toyed with putting all the ingredients to kimchi and basically make sauerkraut. It's basically Korean sauerkraut with ingredients. I'm going to cut this in fourths now. And now I'm going to start making very thin slices. Okay. Now I'm going to take the slices and I'm going to cut them basically the same way and get the slaw. This will look like coleslaw cuts at this point. Basically, you're making coleslaw. You can do this any size you want. It's not like you have to do it small. I've just found that I like eating it when it's smaller than when it's huge chunks. But when I'm done with all this, and be very careful with a knife. Make sure that you're not going to slip and cut your fingers. That's why I like to keep my hands on top, or I like to keep my fingers and my nails to the blade and slightly high, so the cutting action of the blade is always below my fingers. But that being said, if you start going really fast and you're not paying attention, you're liable to cut yourself. That's all I'm saying. But you see how it's slaw-like now? I'll go back after this and I'll actually start doing this just to make sure it's smaller chunks. Okay? See that? That's nice. So now we have 2 containers. It probably makes more sense to have, because I like to pound in the flat bottom container than in my bowl. So it made more sense for me to start with everything in this container, cut it, and then put it in that bowl. But I was just not thinking. But anyway, so if you start with putting all your little slices in the container you're going to pound it in, then when you're done, all of this is actually already over there in that bowl. But I'm just going to move it over there right now. It's not a big deal. Now the next step is to move your bowl to a table on the corner. The reason we put it on the corner is when we pound down, that leg will take all the brunt. The whole table won't be bouncing around everywhere. And what I like to do is I'll use a wine bottle. So you get yourself a wine bottle, and the bottom, if it has a huge indentation, that'll still work. Just remember, you're only working with the ridge, the rim, and then we're gonna pound it. Don't go crazy, it's still a piece of glass, right? So you wanna take care not to just destroy it. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a handful of this, I'm gonna put it in here, and then I'm just gonna pound it. So it's probably a good idea to put on a little bit of music in some headphones, and do this part because, you know, until you get used to it, it's probably going to be just a wee bit tedious. But remember, you're building yourself a medicinal food that you can keep in the fridge, and you're going to eat it. At first, you might eat a tablespoon every day for a week, and then you'll eat a tablespoon every other day for a week, and then, you know, however you feel you need from then on. Sometimes you get your biology in your tummy going just fine. The next thing you know, you've forgotten to eat it for a month, but you're still doing great. But it'll be there. Like I said, it'll be there pretty much good, 6 months to 2 years. I guess it depends on the situation, the temperature of your refrigerator and what was going on in the biology that you made. Because this is all going to be wild fermented. There's no starter that we put in here, although you could probably buy some starter. I used some Caldwell starter, and it was actually pretty tasty. But I like the regular biology is actually, the wild biology that's coming straight out of the air is actually very tasty too, in its own way. I'm going to switch into fast speed mode, but if you look closely at this, I'll get a flashlight. If you look closely at this, you'll see that there's the water, the moisture is coming out. It actually looks like you've boiled it a bit or cooked it. And I like to beat it until it looks like I've caramelized it. Of course I haven't. It's not cooked, it's just beaten. I'm gonna hit some of these chunks. But the moisture starts to come out of it, and that moisture is going to be what fills up the jar that you have it all fermenting in. We'll get to that later. The next step is you put in a little bit of salt. Just a pinch, just put a little pinch of salt and you're done. No, I'm just kidding, look. That would leave you with a rotted pile of mess. What you want is a tablespoon or 3 teaspoons if your tablespoon won't fit into your salt container. So 3 teaspoons is a tablespoon, supposed to be. But what I like to do is, because I don't mind it being a little salty, is I'll throw in, after I mix this up, I'm gonna throw in an additional teaspoon. So that's a tablespoon and a third. Make sure it's nice and mixed. It should be all wet because you've been pounding it. Generally what I'll do is I'll get like a wooden stick. I have a piece of a crepe myrtle branch, and I put my pot on the ground and I use both my arms and I pound down on it. And not everybody's gonna go that route, but it definitely beats it up a lot more, makes it a lot more wet, which is part of the way I like it. But that being said, this is probably how the majority of people do it, right here. Okay, now that that's pretty nicely mixed, I'm going to go ahead and get 1 more teaspoon. I have done these where I've put two tablespoons in. They get a bit salty. You have to, it's all about what you want in your sauerkraut, however you want it to be, however you want it to taste. It didn't ruin the sauerkraut. Sauerkraut still fermented just fine. It just comes out a little salty. I'll even have a habit of, at the very end, putting a little pinch of salt in some water and putting it on the top, but you'll see that later. We're probably gonna need that. We'll see how wet this gets. The salt also seems to draw out some of the moisture. It gets a little wetter after you put the salt in it. So the way I understand it, if you eat a lot of dairy, then eating the dairy-based probiotics actually makes you feel better. I'd go as far as to say that there's a lot of evidence that for some people, not everybody, eating dairy may not be the best for you to begin with. So cutting that out from the start might make you feel better. However, probiotics are definitely a part of it. Like, it seems that the food that we eat comes with the probiotics already on it. If you cook it, then you're killing off the biology. You're making it sterile. If you pasteurize it or sterilize it or whatever, you are making it so that the biology isn't there for you. So then the biology that helps you digest it, which comes on the food, isn't there. So now your body, your stomach acids and things like that have to do all the work, and it's not as efficient. you can sure do it, but it's not as efficient. So people who eat red meat and feel sick, they're actually, you can ferment meat. Raw meat is eaten by people all over the world. You have to be really careful. I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying it's there. Do your own research. Same with, raw milk and things like that. You go do your own research and source the best stuff in the world, and you're doing a lot better for yourself. Now, somebody's probably going to get upset about the idea of this, but, so many people throughout the world eat all the things I'm mentioning and have in their culture for eons. So somebody's capable of eating it. I'm just trying to tell you that the probiotics make it better for you. Okay, so in this case, I'm eating wild fermented probiotics off of cabbage, which, by the way, if you eat this cabbage, eating salad and greens, and a lot of it, every day as a meal, really helps that biology, because the stuff that's growing in this cabbage lives in that biology. It lives in that salad and in those greens. I'm gonna go get another jar. It feasts on that stuff, which means that you're actually feeding the biology inside you, and that's where it should be. Of course, these greens have to be, it's probably better that a lot of those greens and the veggies that you eat after you make this fermentation is actually raw. I imagine cooking it isn't going to be the end of the world. I've felt really good eating cooked vegetables. You see all the water that's in this batch right here at the very end here? I'm going to go ahead and pour that in. If you have a certain diet, and everything in that diet, everything that you eat, you actually grow the biology safely. There are books out there. The one that I like to use is called, what is that one called? It's the Weston A. Price Foundation President's book. And for whatever reason, I can't remember it, but I want to say it's Nourishing Traditions is the name of the book. And I'm trying to remember her name. It's, I'll have to look that up. I'll put it in the video so you can see it. I do not know why I can't remember her name. That's the way it goes sometimes, Sometimer's disease. Anyway, if you get a good recipe and you handle it correctly and you get good at it and you ferment every bit of the food that you eat, your digestive system is so much happier. I would say it even unlocks more nutrients. It makes it easier for your body to digest more of your food. So instead of, there's studies that say that a certain percentage of undigested food comes through our bodies. What a waste of food. If you want to save food and stop being so hungry all the time, you're better off getting the biology in there to assist the digestion so you don't have to worry about not digesting your food and or having an upset stomach. You'll notice that I'm putting this in here. These are wide mouth jars. I can get my whole hand in here. Of course, the narrow mouth, the standard jars, they have less oxygen on the top, which is always a good thing. You don't really want any oxygen touching any of this. If the oxygen does touch it, that's a combination that could give you a mold. So we don't want the mold. Now, as you can see, I don't have that much water. I think if you beat this a little bit more, or if you've grown your own, there's going to be a lot more water in it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add a little bit of water. And because I'm watering it down, I'm going to add a tiny bit of salt, literally like just enough to make it a brine. And I'll be right back. Okay, that's about 2 cups. I'm gonna get some of my salt here. I'm just gonna pinch it in there. I don't want this to get so salty that, it's inedible, because that could happen too. I'm gonna pour a little bit of water in the tops of each one of these. air bubbles are coming out. You don't want that water to be sitting tough on the top, or high on the top. You just want it to be just underneath the surface. And then I take this cabbage leaf that I pulled off to begin with. I actually thought I was going to only have 2 jars, but this was a slightly larger cabbage than I'm used to working with, so I have 3 jars. They're not completely full, but anyway, you push the cabbage leaf down until it's under the water. You see how that works? I hope you're seeing that. Again, if you had a narrow topped jar, this would be a lot tougher to do. Another thing is the water that you use. If you throw water in here and you get it from the tap, it's liable to have a lot of chlorine in it. So more than likely, and this is filtered water from my water filter. If you don't have a water filter, you have to watch out. It used to be you could leave water out and the chlorine would evaporate in a 24-hour period. The problem now is that water has something in it called chlorate, which is new and improved chlorine. And what that means is it doesn't evaporate. They've made it so it stays in, which actually, if what you're trying to do is keep chlorine in water so it can kill off biology, well, it's going to kill off the biology in your fermentation. So you can go buy spring water or distilled water, or get a filter. You're probably better off getting a filter anyway, because for the gut biology, regular water with chlorine in it or chlorate and other things isn't good for you. It's not good for that biology. But there we go. Now I'm just going to put lids on it. I'm going to make them tight. And I'm going to sit those not in direct sunlight. Right now, see that sunlight's coming through the window? That window light is ambient indirect light. If the sun was blasting directly on those, I wouldn't do it. But they could sit here all day long. There's a house on the other side there that blocks the sunlight from coming directly through those windows. So this is a good place, in a cabinet, but anywhere you're not going to forget them. You kind of need them to be on a countertop in your kitchen where you can see them. After 3 days, you just turn the lid and you should hear you can open it up at that point and you can taste it. If it tastes like sauerkraut, it's good. If it needs another day or two, leave it in another day or two. There's nothing wrong with testing it. I'd say get a pair of chopsticks or a fork and get in there and taste a little bit of it, and never double dip. You don't want to get more biology in there that shouldn't be in there. But make sure that it tastes good, and when it's done, put it in the fridge, and there you go. You have 3 wonderful wild fermented probiotic sauerkraut containers. You can mix in after the fact. You can mix everything in before the fact. Other ingredients, those recipes are online. People put caraway seeds. They put obviously the kimchi ingredients that I was talking about earlier. All manner of things. Some people put like raisins and fruit and things in there too. I like to do it just straight sauerkraut and mix it with other things. If you have any questions about that, make a comment and see what we can come up with. This is a batch of sauerkraut that's done that has some peppers and maybe onions and things in it. I think I have green peppers in here too. So some things that you want to put in there. Just let me pull a little bit of it out. That's a good amount to eat. You don't have to eat a ton of it every day, but basically that. Get some chopsticks and it should still be crispy. It should be moist. It should be, like in this case, it's nice and cool, but you can taste the zing in it. You can taste the good stuff in it. I'm not saying this is going to cure any diseases. I'm just saying that it helps a lot of people, makes them feel better, and it is 100% natural.